In this video, we're going to show you how to install your front strut. Now to get started on our job, we're going to come right under the hood. I want you to look in each one of these sides of the vehicle. You're going to find the strut tower. Looking at the strut tower, you'll find 3 mounting studs that come up, and they're held in place with 3 mounting nuts. Now looking at this, you can tell that one's out in the open. The other 2 are a little further towards the rear of the vehicle, and they're kind of covered underneath this plastic and metal cowl. Now to be able to torque this when you put it back together, you're not going to be able to get a torque wrench in there to be able to torque those rear mounting nuts. With that said, we'll have to remove the plastic cowl and the metal cowl. Let's start removing each of our wiper arms. It's important to make sure that you remember exactly which arm goes where. They have a little bit of a different bend to them, so it should be fairly easy to remember. You'll find a 14mm nut holding each of these in place. Remove the nut and then carefully remove the wiper arm from the area. The next thing we need to do is break the wiper arm free from the wiper assembly located inside this area. All you need to do for that is carefully get up here, give this a little wiggle, and you'll notice that it starts to break free in this area. If you needed to, you could also use some penetrant. Just be extremely careful for any pinch points, like along this area. Commonly, you might have to lift the hood up a little bit higher than usual for this. We'll set this aside and do the exact same thing for the passenger side wiper blade. To start taking off the plastic cowl, you'll notice that you have a rubber seal that makes its way across the front. Carefully remove that rubber seal going across. Now you only really need to go halfway, because what you'll notice is with this plastic cowl, it has a halfway point where essentially you can separate the 2 pieces. Let's move along to the side. You're going to find that you have a plastic push clip. For the push clips, it's a good idea to carefully get underneath the center and lift it up. That'll unlock it. After that, you can lift it up, remove it. Now that we have that push pin out, make your way over to the passenger side and do the exact same thing. Now let's grab onto the plastic cowl. We're going to give it a little wiggle up and down and try to pull it forward at the same time. Once it's broken free, we're going to continue on to try to separate the 2 areas. Remove each side. Let's move along to disconnecting our wiper motor connector. Looking at the white area of the connector, right up along the top, there's a squeeze tab. Squeeze that, separate the 2. Every time you disconnect an electrical connector, take a peek. If you see any funny colors, it's corrosion. Dismount our wire from this area. Now it's time to dismount the wiper assembly. You're going to find 2 10mm headed mounting bolts. Remove the pair. Now once you have both of those mounting bolts off of there, we're going to have to grab onto this and pull it towards the passenger side. Looking down inside this area, you can see that there's a rubber bushing that goes in sideways into the body. Let's start removing the metal part of the cowl. For this, you're going to find several 10mm headed bolts to remove it. Let's start over on the driver's side and make our way over to the passenger side. All right, we're at the point that we can continue by grabbing onto the metal aspect of this. We'll carefully lift it up, being extremely careful not to damage our paint or hit the windshield. Remove this from the vehicle. Now with that out of the way, you have a nice clear view of the top of both sides of your strut. Now we're not going to deal with either of the mounting nuts on this. At this point, you're going to want to safely raise and support the front of the vehicle with the suspension hanging. Now that we have the wheel safely raised and supported from the ground, we're going to continue on to removing all 5 of our 21mm lug nuts, and then the wheel. Once you have the wheel off, continue on by putting one of the lug nuts onto the stud to hold your rotor in place. Now that we have that lug nut on there, let's continue on to the area where the sway bar link connects onto our front strut. You'll find that you have a 17mm nut holding it in place. To easily remove that 17mm nut, looking in the center of the stud, you'll find an area that you can use a 6mm Allen head socket. So with that said, I'll continue on with a 17mm wrench on my nut. After that, I'll use my 6mm Allen head to hold the stud still. Now we're going to continue by turning the 17mm wrench counterclockwise to remove the mounting nut. It's common to find when you're trying to remove your sway bar link nut, as you're trying to hold the stud in the center, the hole will strip out. Now if that happens, commonly you're going to have to go ahead and replace the sway bar link, because to remove it, you'll have to use some locking pliers from the back side of the strut where the sway bar link is. You'll squeeze on that sway bar link stud, hold it in place, and then remove the 17mm nut. Now I have some locking pliers holding this in place along the back side. I'll continue removing my 17mm mounting nut. Now along the forward side of the strut, you're going to find that you have one 14mm headed mounting bolt that holds your flex hose and your ABS wire bracket in place. Remove that mounting bolt. Separate the ABS wire and the brake flex hose from your strut. Follow that ABS wire to where it connects onto the strut. You're going to find a plastic clip. You can use a small screwdriver or pick, carefully get under the ridge and break it free. At this point, we have plenty of slack from the ABS wire and for the flex hose. It's extremely important to make sure while you're doing the process of removing the strut, you pay complete attention to these so you do not put a tug and damage them. Now let's move along to removing our axle nut. Looking at this, where the slot is on the axle shaft, you can see that the nut is driven into the slot. That's essentially holding it locked in place. Carefully use a screwdriver or small prying device, get inside that slot and gently pry this up. Now that I have that area peened up and out of the way, I'm going to continue on with a 12-point 30mm socket. Continue on with a little bit of penetrant. Also, you want to make sure you have a hammer and punch. We'll come right in the center of this axle, give it a couple loving bonks to break it free from the wheel bearing. Now we can move along to removing the 2 mounting bolts that hold our steering knuckle to the bottom of the strut. We're going to use a 22mm on the bolt side, and we'll also use a 22mm to remove each of the mounting nuts. I'll leave my bolt in there for now and fully remove my second. Now we can carefully remove our second bolt here. As you remove this, keep in mind, this is going to want to come swinging down towards you. As I start pulling this down towards me, I'm also going to be trying to push my axle stud through the wheel bearing. Now once you have that separated, go ahead and hang it aside. While you're doing that, make sure you're putting no pressure on your ABS wire or brake flex hose. Alright, so now the next thing that we're going to do is make our way back up into the engine compartment. Looking along the top of your strut tower, you're going to find those 3 14mm headed mounting nuts. We're going to remove each of the 3. As you're removing them, make sure that you have one of your hands down inside the wheel well, holding onto that coil spring, which is attached to the strut, essentially so it does not fall. I'll leave this one on there a little bit. Now I'll grab that strut, hold it up, and finish removing my last nut. There it is, friends. Now the next thing we have to do is very carefully try to compress our coil spring on the strut itself. That's going to be easiest using some sort of spring compression tool. While you're doing it, you need to be extremely careful. With that said, I'll start compressing this and then we'll make our way up to the top of the mount. Now once you feel as though you've got plenty of room in between the coil spring and the strut itself, you should be ready to make your way up here. On the top of the mount, typically you're going to find that you have some sort of protective cover that's blocking the nut. Let's remove that protective cover. Now right underneath that, directly in the center, you're going to find one 19mm nut. As you remove this nut, make sure you're holding onto the strut so it does not fall down and potentially hurt you. Let's carefully remove the strut from the area. The next thing that we're going to do is remove our jounce bumper right here on the strut. Right off of there. This area right here should be a protective boot. Now that we have all that off of there, let's continue on with this lower mounting area. Give this a quick inspection. Make sure it's still reusable. We'll set this aside. Okay friends, now it's time to start preparing our brand new strut. You'll notice on it, it comes with this protective metal strap. Carefully press down on the strut piston. As you compress it, that should want to come loose. You can take that right off of there and let the piston fully decompress. Now it's going to be time to put on our lower mount. Now as we slide this on, you can see that there's a ridge that protrudes down on the rubber mount. Go ahead and slide it down into the area on the strut where you can see it bevels down and in. Once you feel as though you have that lined up, we can continue on. Let's continue swapping things over. We'll take that jounce bumper, slide it down over the strut shaft here. The next thing we're going to do is take our boot and we'll put that on as well. Slide that down. We'll get it sitting in the groove. Now we can start putting this over the coil spring. As we bring it over the coil spring, you want to pay attention to this area on the strut where it drops down. You want to make sure you line that up with the very end of the coil spring. The next thing we want to do is pay attention to the top shaft of the strut here. You're going to find that it has one flat area. We'll line those up, slide it in. Put the cap right on over the top there. Now we can start on our mounting nut. Let's go ahead and snug up that mounting nut. The next thing we're going to do is start decompressing our spring to apply tension to this area. As we do it, you need to make sure you're paying attention down along the bottom here. Once again, you want to make sure that the coil spring is seating perfectly into that lower mounting point. Get that lined up. Get that lined up. Now before you fully decompress the coil spring, double check it. It needs to be seated perfectly along the bottom and along the top. At this point, let's pause on decompressing the spring. Move back up to your top mounting nut. It's important to make sure you torque this to 29 foot-pounds. There we are. Make sure that this can still spin and it's not binding in any way. Let's put on our protective cover. Now we can finish decompressing our spring. Let's get back over to the vehicle. Let's take this and put it in place inside the wheel well. We'll bring it up and through into the engine compartment through the strut tower. Now, as I bring it up into the strut tower, I'm trying to line up those mounting studs. Start on all three of your mounting nuts. Now back inside the wheel well, we'll continue on by taking our knuckle and carefully putting it up into the lower strut. Once you have it up in there, try lining up your mounting bolt holes. After that, starting your mounting bolts from the rear towards the front. We'll start these on here, bottom them out. After that, we'll continue on by torquing them to 177 foot-pounds. Now let's continue on to this area right here. It's going to be important to make sure that you resecure your brake flex hose. We'll slide that right into place. Once you have that on there, continue on to your ABS bracket. Looking at this ABS bracket, along the backside, you're going to find that you have this locating tab. Along the top area of the strut, you have the area where that tab needs to sit. Get that flex hose back in place, slide this down into position, line up that bolt hole. Once it's lined up, continue on with your 14mm headed bolt. Make sure it's completely secured to the strut. Let's get that sway bar link lined up with our strut. Push it right on through. Start on the nut, bottom it out, torque that to 55 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to install our axle nut. We'll start this on, snug it up by hand. Now that you have it bottomed out by hand, the next thing that you want to do is bring it closer to the ground. You'll find that I have a nice long pry bar going diagonally across the studs, being sure not to damage them in any way. The reason why I have that on there is because while we torque this, it's going to try to spin on you. You want to hold it in place. Now we can torque this to 160 foot-pounds. Now, once you have it torqued, the next thing you want to do is make sure you peen that nut down into the groove of the axle. We'll do that using a hammer and punch. Once you have it peened down in place, you can be sure that this will not loosen up on you while you're driving down the road. Let's remove our lug nut and then get ready to reinstall our wheel. Now we're just going to start on all 5 of our 21mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out in a crisscross manner, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque each of them to 76 foot-pounds. Now that we have the wheel safely on the ground, let's torque these in a crisscross manner. The next thing you want to do is make sure that you have the wheel and the full body weight of the vehicle on the ground. After that, you're going to continue up inside the engine compartment and tighten each one of these 3 mounting nuts. Once you have them snugged, torque each of them to 35 foot-pounds. At this point, I've showed you how to install one side of the strut. You're going to want to make your way over to the other side of the vehicle. Do the exact same thing. Whenever you replace a strut, you always make sure you do them as a pair. Once you have both of them in the vehicle, we'll continue on with our center cowl. Let's get this in here. All right, now once it's in there, line up all your mounting holes and install all of your mounting bolts. Now we can install our wiper regulator assembly. Pay attention to this rubber grommet here. You need to make sure it slides into the body. After that, we'll line up both of our mounting bolts, start them in, and snug them up. Let's connect that in. Make sure you secure it as well. Now it's going to be time to insert our plastic cowl. Let's have a look at this area. This is the side that's going to be closest to the windshield. You'll notice along this, there's a rubber seal. That goes on top of the windshield. Along that area, you're also going to find some locating tabs. Those go under the windshield. Let's carefully slide this in place, making sure we do not damage our glass in any way. Now we'll do the same to the other side. Once you have it on there, continue on with your plastic push clips. Do the same on both sides. Continue on with your rubber seal. Now we can start sliding this down. Before we continue pressing it all the way down, pay attention to where the wiper blade hits up against the windshield. You want to make sure you have it up and away from the plastic, but not too far up the windshield. We'll have it approximately 1 inch from this area, and then we'll gently press this down. Start the nut on there, snug it up. Once you have your mounting nut on there, continue on with your plastic protective cover. Let's do the same to the other wiper arm. Okay friends, we got our strut installed in the vehicle. At this point, you want to go ahead and take it for a road test. Make sure you don't hear any funny noises and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.